By now, you should have a pretty clear understanding on what a mathematical edge is, and we have looked at how casinos are the masters of the world at exploiting their slight positive edge. So now we're going to look at how we can develop a trading strategy that also has a positive expectancy, just like a casino does. And we're also going to look at how important it actually is to be right in trading, the answer to which may actually surprise some of you. So let's look at these two traders, Juan and Steve, who are battling it out in the markets. Both of them have taken 100 trades each and started with the same amount of trading capital. Now Juan took 75 wins and just 25 losses, giving him an incredible strike rate of 75%. Steve, on the other hand, he managed only 30 wins and therefore booked 70 losses, giving him a strike rate of just 30%. So who is the better trader? Well, based on just these stats alone, we can clearly see that Juan is right a lot more often than Steve is when trading, but to truly determine who is the better overall trader, we are missing some key pieces of information. Having an edge in the market, it essentially just means that you hold a positive profit expectancy. And there are only 4 elements that determine your edge in the market: your win rate, your loss rate, the average profit on your winning trades, and the average size of your loss on your losing trades. So to improve our edge in the markets, we need to increase our profit expectancy by altering these 4 elements. So we can either improve our strike rate, which is the first 2 elements, so how often you win or how often you lose, and or we need to increase the size of our winners and or decrease the size of our losers so that our average P&L increases and our average reward to risk ratio improves, right? Now in the previous lesson where we discussed how casinos make money, we saw that they added a green 0 to the roulette wheel, which stacked the odds in their favour ever so slightly to give them an edge by increasing their win rate. And that's one way in which the casino improved their expectancy. Now, if you also remember the coin toss example, where Sam negotiated with Sarah to only pay her 90 pence when he lost, and for Sarah to pay him a full £1 when he won, this is the 4th method, right? Because he decreased his losses so that his winners were then bigger than his losses, which finally gave him a positive profit expectancy, which then gave him a profitable edge in a 50-50 coin flip game. So going back to our 2 traders battling it out, we only know the first 2 elements, so their win and their loss rate, but to know who is the better overall trader, we need to know the amount of profit made when each trader wins a trade, as well as the amount lost when they lose a trade. So in other words, we need to calculate the trader's reward to risk ratios over their 100 trades. So when Juan wins, he makes an average profit of $1,000 per trade, and when wrong, he makes an average $3,000 loss. So this means that he has a negative reward to risk ratio of 1 to 3, as his losers are 3 times bigger than his winners on average. Now when Steve is right, he makes $3,000 on average per trade, and when he's wrong, on average, he only loses $1,000. So this means he has a positive reward to risk ratio of 3 to 1, as on average, his winners are 3 times larger than his losers. So this gives us a lot more insight into the traders. And we can see that Juan is willing to risk 3 times more than he stands to gain in any one trade, whereas Steve is looking for a much bigger payoff, but he's not willing to risk as much as Juan per trade. Now, to really understand how each of our traders' strategies stack up against each other, we need to calculate their profit expectancy. So this essentially tells us how much we stand to gain or lose as a trader for every dollar that we risk in the market. So you should already know the formula to calculate this now. So you take the size of your average profit on winning trades and you multiply that by your win rate. And then you add this figure to the size of your average loss on your losing trades and you multiply that by your loss rate. So in Juan's case, he had a high win rate of 75% and he made $1,000 on average on his winning trades. So you multiply those together and add that to the number to his average loss, which is a whopping $3,000 multiplied by his loss rate, which was only 25%. And we can see that his overall profit expectancy is just $0. So he's breaking even. Now, when looking at Steve, he only won 30% of the time, but when he did, he won big with $3,000 on average. And then if we add this to his loss rate, which is quite high at 70%, but he only lost $1,000 on average on his losing trades, which means he had a healthy positive profit expectancy of $200. So what does this actually mean? Well, despite winning 75% of the time, Juan is a break-even trader because the size of his losses far outweigh the size of his winning trades. So for Juan's strategy to become profitable, he either needs to win even more often or improve his average reward to risk ratio. Now, Steve's profit expectancy, it tells that he's averaging $200 profit per trade, even though he's losing and he's wrong 70% of the time. His high reward to risk strategy means that he can be wrong much more frequently than Juan, but still make a net profit overall. So hopefully now you can see how clear and important it is to focus on the metrics as a whole that matter, because strike rate on its own is a completely irrelevant metric. Your average P&L on its own is pretty much irrelevant too. So when it comes to analysing your trading, combining these stats together to calculate your profit expectancy will give you a much more accurate representation of your true trading performance. So you can essentially think of your expectancy in the market as the amount that you theoretically get paid on average to execute a trade over the long run. Now, it's impossible to always be right when trading Forex. However, calculating your expectancy can really help you to shift your focus away from trying to be right on each individual trade to instead how right you are over the long term. Now, there are two profitability models in trading. The first is a high strike rate strategy, which are simply those that win more times than they lose. And the second is a high reward to risk ratio strategy, which are strategies that win big, but not necessarily often, as they usually have a much lower strike rate. So the idea of high reward to risk strategies are essentially to cut your losses short and let your profits run so that your winning positions more than cover your losing trades and leave you with a healthy net profit. Now, although high reward risk strategies are more common and preferred by more professionals, they often require traders to lose more often than they win. Now, this presents a psychological barrier because it's against our nature to continue doing something, right, whereby we are consistently losing. So this is why most education companies, they'll market high strike rate strategies because the masses can swallow that concept much easier. Now, if you're new to trading, you may have some difficulty trying to accept that you could spend a lot of your time losing, and this is why we have spent so much time working on your psychology and showing you how probability really works. And I know that if you persist through any of the hard times, you will soon just become completely numb to losing trades, and you will break through the threshold of trading consistency. Now, with those two profitability models, it is generally a trade-off and a bit of a balancing act between both your strike rate and your average reward to risk ratio, because they typically have an inverse relationship. So the more that you try and increase your average reward risk ratio by trying to consistently hit those huge home run wins, then a lot of the time when you're in those trades, price isn't going to trend that far, and it will often pull back to either stop you out, despite you being in a decent amount of running profit beforehand. So you can take quite a few losses or break evens or maybe very tiny wins before you hit and bank that big winning trade. So what this can mean is that your strike rate will be a bit lower in comparison to a trader who aims for a much lower reward to risk ratio, and they can typically have a slightly higher strike rate. So hopefully you've watched the first episode in this module called Are You Destined to Fail? And you may remember the trading data that was analysed from the popular retail broker FXCM, where over 70% of their traders lost money despite having a reasonably high strike rate of 62%. And it was all because those trades, on average, had a negative reward to risk ratio. Now you can see their losers were bigger than their winners, and it all comes back to the human psychology of avoiding pain and wanting to be right. And that's why most traders try to go for that higher strike rate approach, but they struggle to achieve the reward to risk ratio required to make money overall. So that's where the inverse relationship between reward to risk and strike rate comes into play. And the higher your average reward to risk ratio, then the less often you actually need to win. So if you make all the mistakes that most of the masses of traders make, such as taking your profits too early out of fear, or maybe letting your losses run because you just can't stomach locking the loss in, and you're hoping that it's going to turn around in your favor, then you're going to have a low average reward to risk ratio. So in that case, your only hope of becoming profitable is by maintaining an extremely high strike rate, which is not easy to do. Now here's a table that shows the required strike rate you need in order to break even, depending on what your average R multiple is. So your R multiple, it's essentially just your reward to risk, but displayed as a number. So if you have a negatively skewed reward to risk ratio like Juan, and your losers are say double the size of your winners, then your reward to risk ratio is 1 to 2, and then if you divide 1 by 2, you get 0.5, so that is your R multiple. So in that case, if your average losing trade is double the size of your average winning trade, then you need a 67% strike rate just to break even. However, if you can get your average winners to be 3 times the size of your average losers, so you have an R multiple of 3, then you can be wrong 75% of the time and still break even. it really shows the true power of having a high reward to risk ratio strategy, where it really no longer matters if you take many losing trades. As long as you keep your losers small, then your winners will pay for your losers and more. Now, when you can maintain a high reward to risk ratio, but also start to slowly increase your strike rate as you gain more and more experience and knowledge, then that's when you have a really powerful combo and you can start to make some serious money. So let's hop on the charts and see what this actually looks like on there. Right, so we've essentially looked at the sort of basic mathematical relationship between both your strike rate and your risk to rewards that you achieve, right? So the size of your average wins and size of your average losses, right, to give you your average risk to reward. Okay, great. But how does that actually look kind of in reality, when we are trading on the charts and we're sizing up positions and, we are managing then those positions? Well, going back to the risk to reward tool that we very briefly looked at in the risk management lessons on position sizing, right? We know that when you open this up, so hopefully you guys should have this saved down to your favorite toolbars up here. If you haven't, then you can find it on the left hand side where you have your long position and your short position, and then just save those down. So yeah, it's really, really simple. Essentially where this is a long position, the line in the middle is where you enter, gives you your price on your right hand side, and then this represents your risk, right? In this case, I've just changed it to a blue box. Change it to whatever you want. It's kind of irrelevant, the color. But yeah, essentially the gray here is our reward and our blue box here is our risk, right? So obviously the aim of the game is to get this box as small as possible, and we want to get this box as big as possible here so that we increase our risk reward. So as you can see, this number here in the middle denotes your risk reward. So what I'm actually going to do is just double click to open up the stats, because I have it on compact stats mode, just because it's just a little bit clearer. But essentially that would explain it there if you have it on the default mode there. And as you can see, as you make your stop loss bigger, right, and your reward stays the same, that means that your risk reward is going to fall, right, because your risk is getting bigger and bigger in comparison to your reward. So your ratio is getting smaller and smaller, and obviously as you decrease your stop loss size, your reward is going to get bigger, right? Hopefully that is kind of self-explanatory. So yeah, this is pretty much what an edge looks like on the charts. We're obviously, like I said, trying to get this as small as possible whilst trying to get the trade to run in our favor as long as possible. And the more that we can do that, the bigger our risk rewards will be, the more money we will make on our winners. And then that for means, as long as we're keeping our losses, that strict -1 hour loss, right? We always keep our risk fixed, right, with that small stop loss, then that means we can afford to have a lower strike rate, right? The higher this number is, the lower the strike rate you can get away with and still break even, at a bare minimum. So yeah, that's pretty much it. It's very, very simple. If you can open this up again and play around with it and just put in the pips. So let's say we have a 20 pip target and then a 20 pip stop loss. That's obviously even, so we're going to have that risk reward of 1, and then that would just be your 50% edge. If you just put this on anywhere and you just let trades play out over time, you're going to have that 50-50 edge, right? So what we want to try and do is reduce that a little bit. Obviously, as we go on to actually learn the technical aspect of the strategy, you're going to learn how we actually can get away with extremely tight stop losses. But then once we're in the trade, how we try and manage that to try and squeeze out as much sort of maximum reward as we can. But for now, all you need to really kind of get around in your heads is just that relationship, which is typically kind of an inverse relationship between strike rate and risk reward, and then how that translates on the charts when we're actually sizing up our positions. And yeah, that's all you guys need to know for now. But yeah, we'll get into this in a lot more detail when we actually start to look at the actual technical side of the strategy. So let's say that you have a pretty low strike rate of 30%. Then on average, you can expect to win 3 trades out of every 10, right? But if the size of your average winner is plus 3R and the size of your average loser is only minus 1R, then that will give you an average reward to risk ratio of 3-1. Then on average, after 10 trades, you would actually make a net profit of 2R. So what this means is with a 3-1 risk to reward ratio, you can be wrong up to 75% of the time and still break even. Having that high risk reward really is powerful. So you should now have a pretty good idea of what expectancy is within trading and the methods that we can use to increase our edge. And that being right or wrong, it really doesn't matter whatsoever in trading. It's pretty irrelevant. It's all about how much money you make when you are right and how much you lose when you are wrong. When you can truly grasp this concept, the psychology of trading will become vastly easier on your psyche.